Thank you very much for having me at this conference. I'm really proud to have a chance to discuss with you some ideas today, because most of what will be presented today has evolved through countless discussions and presentations with people here at Harvard. And I can really say that what we see now as not the end, but let's say a milestone of an important trajectory, has very much benefited from the incredible capacity of cross-contamination that is enabled by this environment. So I'm really, really happy to have had the chance to discuss these issues in the last 10 years. And what will be the focus of my presentation? At the end, I will speak about a case, although a case that is now being launched. But what I want to do before is to give you the conceptual background that has been developed in the last 10 years. In this kind of discussions, it's in some sense, it's also an outgrowth of, let's say, the Harvard environment, because I think it helps, in some sense, understand what could be seen as just another, yet very, very big project, but that acquires, I think, a completely different light if seen in the right perspective. So first of all, the real point is that culture is really about behavioral change, but the point is that it's been about behavioral change all the time. Today it's very difficult to realize this in many policy circles, in which culture is very much about the entertainment economy and all this kind of stuff. But the problem is that if we have even a cursory review of the latest research on these issues from different angles that go from social neuroscience to physiology to social psychology, you name it, we really see that there is an incredible amount of different pathways through which culture can affect behavior. So, for example, one of the most widely studied recently is synchronization and social connection. We have amazing results that say that, for example, participation is able to synchronize cardiac rhythm with a strength that is positively related to social distance, which means that the closer you are relationally to somebody, the more likely it is that you synchronize your heartbeat at a distance, and this is really, we don't know why, we don't know why this happens. In some sense, we can observe this, but the science of understanding these effects is yet to come almost completely. And we know, for example, how cultural experiences are so important to hone our predictive effectiveness. Today, for example, in neuroscience, the predictive brain paradigm is becoming mainstream. And interestingly, what we generally, in some sense, blame culture about, not we, but I mean most of the people around, is that culture is a low-stake activity. It's something that does not seem to be related to the big issues or the big challenges, and not a matter of life and death, and so on and so forth. The point is that what we are learning through the predictive brain paradigm is that basically culture is so fundamental exactly because it's a low-stake activity. Because thanks to this, we can develop skills that are absolutely crucial in life and death situations that could not be learned in that kind of situations. And the very fact that we misunderstand the functional salience of culture in this context speaks volumes in terms of what we still have to understand. Then, of course, we know a lot about emotional regulation component, and the pandemic has been a sort of gigantic social experiment in this regard, and we have a massive amount of data that are flowing in terms of the capacity of cultural engagement to help people literally manage the emotional stress of the pandemic. Of course, the contribution of fiction to theory of mind, and more generally fictional worlds as fundamental social simulation platforms, the contribution of culture about in-group cooperation, out-group bridging, mental and physical health. Tom's presentation, I mean, is self-explanatory in this regard, and much more. What I really can wrap my mind around is the fact that we have been working in the social sciences on totally artificial frameworks for behavioral change, like nudging, that are completely artificial and completely devoid of any specific evolutionary basis when we have this kind of a naturally inbuilt system for behavioral change. So the real issue is how can we, in some sense, build on this perspective, and in particular, how can we think of artistic agency in this specific respect? The point is that who are artists? Well, after more than 10 years of speculation, I should say that my personal take of artists is that they are legitimized deviants. You know what? In traditional societies, everybody participates in collective rituals, but there is no need to define somebody as the artist. And the reason is very simple. These societies are very traditional, they evolve very slowly, and basically nobody can challenge the tradition and nobody can challenge the canon. It's very much about conforming to the traditional ritual, and the ritual is valuable exactly because it cannot be changed, or because it changes very, very slowly. The point is that we have invented a paradigm for cultural production called the so-called patronage cultural regime, in which we have completely turned upside down this idea. And the reason why this happened has to do, as I briefly commented before, with classical Greece and with the invention of democracy in Greece. We had a big problem related to the fact that, of course, if you want to have a democracy in a former tyranny and in which people have very, very little familiarity with counterfactual reasoning, it's all about what-if kind of reasonings. This has been the role of theater. But imagine this. You are a playwright, and you have to present a story in which somebody kills his father and marries his mother. What would happen in a traditional society? You would be killed instantly, because this is challenging the social norms so dramatically that it's unbearable. So what is the rationale of the patronage regime? We have to create an area of exemption in which somebody is authorized to think about just everything without bearing the consequences of what they imagine. So literally, we give them a monopoly on creative imagination. In this society, basic societies, because of course this evolves through time. For example, the Greek patronage is in some sense a proto-patronage in which the problem was changing the political order. But for example, in the classical patronage paradigm in Rome, is about virtue signaling. Of course, I don't have the time to elaborate on this, but I think there are fascinating stories that could be told about each of these regimes. In the Renaissance, is very much about establishing soft power. The reason why the Renaissance flourishing, artistic flourishing, actually happened was the fact that Italy was a completely divided and weak, militarily weak territory in which, without the soft power, literally, this territory would have been swept away by foreign invaders, okay? And art was literally used to capitalize on a completely different source of influence. And then, of course, the social distinction, that is the bourgeois public patronage mark. Interestingly, the highbrow-lowbrow distinction about art and culture was invented there, at the end of the parable. For a very long time, the idea there could be highbrow versus lowbrow was completely unnatural in most of the world. Still today, it is. So it's interesting to understand that there has been, for a very, very long time of our cultural evolution, not long in historical time, but certainly long in terms of speed of change, because this is a matter of few centuries, that of course, in the arc of human evolution is practically an instant. Interestingly, we have developed this paradigm of specialization and even monopoly of creative imagination that, by the way, with the uptake of culture and creative industry production after the Industrial Revolution, has basically confirmed this artistic deviance. It has further legitimized this, but in a completely different sphere, in this case, in some sense, finalizing the turn that was already established with the public patronage regime in terms of art as entertainment and stardom as the social mark of consolidation and legitimization. The point is that now, today, we are in a different phase, and we are just starting to understand the consequences of this. We are in a post-scarcity economy for the first time in human history, which means that the large swaths of our society basically live as if they could not starve. This is something that, as obvious as it is for now, for us, is completely unprecedented over a long-term historical scale. What is the consequence of this? That if people have now, in some sense, the freedom to explore new alternatives that are typical of post-scarcity societies and are not bound to traditionally socially fixated identities, in some sense, what happens today is that everybody wants to be a deviant. It's no longer the case that we can have the monopoly, because everybody thinks they have an authorship. They have a right not simply to speak, but to imagine. And this unleashes an incredible possibility that in some sense is the world we are starting to live in. The point is that we don't understand this world fully enough. Aesthetic experience. We have spoken about aesthetic experience at length in this conference, but the point is that the modes of aesthetic experience are extremely different in different production regimes. In the pre-patronage regime of tradition, basically aesthetic experience is effervescence. We understand this very well by for example, the neurobiological analysis of collective rituals that have to do with an incredible amount of pleasure and pain, often more pain than pleasure, but create a situation of hallucination in which this collective hallucination becomes fundamental for social cohesion. The Culture 1.0, the patronage model of aesthetic experience is illumination. The artists, from their superior position, can open up aesthetic worlds that are up for grabs to everybody, but on a top-down perspective in which it is the artist that illuminates you, okay? With Culture 2.0, with the culture and creative industry is about engagement. You have to get people stuck to the screen or stuck to the stage, stuck to everything that in that moment is creating economic value, okay? So to make people willing to pay for this. What is happening today is that we are starting to experiment a new mode of aesthetic experience, which is connection. When we look at a Banksy, let's say, how to call it? It's not an installation, it's not a painting. A Banksy intervention, when we look at it, in some sense, we are not interested in the originality of the language. We are not interested in practically anything that has to do with the traditional way of evaluating artistic interventions. It has to do with the sense of connection that this creates with audiences that are generally not even interested to arts and culture in the literal sense. But since we have today with us Tania, well, I think that the arte util perspective that Tania has developed so brilliantly, I think is an incredible example of the aesthetics of connection and looking at the meaning of artistic intervention, not from the point of view of the artists of the art world, but of the people who are engaging with it. So this is really, in some sense, a Copernican revolution. Okay, so I'll try to be very quick. So with Culture 3.0, we have an unprecedented opportunity of massive social change through a series of dimensions that are yet to be explored in full, but it really has to do with a new sense of agency, new sense of social exchange, building on an implicit social grammar that people know. For example, when we spoke of gastronomy yesterday, that's a perfect example of this, and especially unleashing new waves of collective intelligence. The point is that there is a long-term trend here. The irony of history is that every regime has been developed by a civilization that was not really able to become the innovation leader for that regime. Why? Because there was so much, let's say, incumbent value in just presiding the previous one. So, for example, the innovation creator, writing is the enabling technology of patronage. It was developed in the Middle East. It was clearly developed by Europe. The Industrial Revolution and content reproduction technologies were mostly born in Europe, but Europe was not really able to embrace this new revolution because it would have been given up, would have meant giving up all the advantages of controlling the highbrow culture on which patronage was built. The US today are building the digital content creation ecosystems, but they are so stuck in the traditional business models of the culture and creative industry that they are not really exploring the possibility of this Culture 3.0. Who is actually able to do this? Most likely the Global South. So today we have a few grand societal challenges that we can tackle with culture on a completely different scale and from a completely different perspective. And also in this conference, we saw examples that include health and welfare systems, environmental sustainability. What you have here is the new European Bauhaus, one of the flagship projects of the European Union for the future, literally leveraging upon arts and culture to enhance the green transition of the European continent, no less. Socially sustainable innovation and social inequalities. What is happening, and now I come to the case, and Fawaz, I promised that in 2 minutes I'm done. Europe has developed massive projects of culture and innovation ecosystems on a series of different topics. And these are the most ambitious and long-term projects of Europe among all the programs. And so far, the innovation ecosystems have been climate, digital, food, health, energy, the real stuff. What is the interesting innovation? That through the kind of perspective that I have developed, and in particular through the interaction with the European Commission, I have been actually the advisor of the European Commissioner for Culture in the crucial moment in which the new agenda was established, we were able to basically bring about a new kick on culture and creativity. Today, culture and creativity in Europe sit at on the same page as climate, health, digital, food, you name it. It's a 300 million euros project, at least twice as much of investment attraction, and basically the focus is innovation in artistic education, applied research, business creation, culture for social change, 6 co-location centers across Europe, including Bologna in Italy, and now the new headquarters just established in Cologne, Germany. So, this project in particular will cover 5 key strategic areas: education, innovation, creation, society, and system. What is the idea? The idea that with the project at that scale, we can really unleash at the societal level, at a massive scale, the perspective of culture as a game changer, in particular as a platform of behavioral change. Europe is taking this as the flagship project for culture for the next 10 years and wants now to reach out to the whole world, working together on this. My role here is as the chief of the policy area of this new project, in which we can actually, of course, reach out to all global partners that are interested in co-developing with us these new solutions. So, in a nutshell, let's make this happen together. Thank you very much.